Welcome to the Missional Life, Session 3. In this session, we're going to talk about seeing Jesus, especially as He works in the lives of the people around us. So, number one on your books, we must go where missing persons are. We're missionaries, remember from Session 1? So, because we're missionaries, we're not asking our non-believing friends to come to us. We're actually going to them. We're going to invest in their lives, in their activities. We're going to find ways to be involved in what they care about. So how do we do that? Well, there's three groups of people we want to focus on. The first group, and it's listed here in your books, is people you already know. People you already know. People that are already in those networks from your impact list. And in this case, you want to include those people in stuff you're already doing. And you want to take a genuine interest in what they're doing. So remember, you listed interests in Session 1. You want to find a way to include the people in your network so don't know Jesus in the stuff that you're already doing right now. And you also want to take a genuine interest in what they're doing. It's really nice when the people we love the stuff we love. Years ago when I first came to Tucson, Hope and I met Jim and Shannon Ward. And not long after that, Jim and I started hanging out. And my first year here, I bought season tickets to the University of Arizona football. And that was a lot of fun for me to go to all the home games. And I realized that if I convinced my wife to stay home a few games, I could actually take someone else, and I would spend the entire ride to and from the game talking to them, halftime talking to them, and then banter throughout the game. So I invited Jim to one of those games. He loved going to the game, I loved going to the game, and I loved spending time with my non-believing friends. So it was a win-win. Then I also, later on, met Benjamin Nauer after Ben sold me my house. And Ben and Christina invited us over out to eat after we invited them over to our house, and we kept going out to eat. At one point, we sat down with them at a restaurant, and I looked them in the eye, and I said to Ben and Christina, "What do you guys do for fun? What do you guys enjoy doing?" And I'll never forget, Ben and Christina said, "We love playing bridge." And my response was, I've always wanted to learn how to play bridge. My wife cut a glance at me like, "What are you talking about? You don't want to learn how to play bridge. That's for old people." And I just ignored her glance. Because you know what? Maybe deep down that was a little bit of a white lie. I didn't really want to learn how to play bridge before that moment. But I did at that moment. I did at that moment because Ben and Christina loved playing bridge back then. And I wanted to be their friend. I wanted to spend time with them. So you know what? Hope and I learned to play bridge. We even went to Ben and Christina's bridge club once and played bridge with other people. We learned how to play bridge until one day we had the guts to say, "Hey, can we play spades or just watch movies or do something different tonight?" The reality is we invested in what they cared about. And that's something we have to do with the people we already know. The second group is people you used to know. In other words, people that you used to work with, you grew up with, went to middle school with, people that used to be in your life, but they've moved on, or maybe you have. Those people, I would use Facebook to get reacquainted. It's amazing at how many old friendships I've rekindled just because of social media. Social media is a great way to reconnect. And the next thing you know, you're off having coffee, catching up with an old friend and finding out where life has taken them. And that's another group to look at. The third group is people you'd like to know. That is, people you don't currently know, but you could get to know them. One of my favorite ways of doing this is visiting third places. Third places are not my place, not your place. They're another place. They're a third place. It's a place where we gather together that's not my space or your turf. It's a third place. Starbucks is a great example. On Mondays, Dustin and I go eat lunch at a place called Native. And we go there every Monday, and we get one of two servers every single week. And then afterwards, we go across the street to Dunkin' Donuts, and we buy a couple of donuts. And we see the same people every Monday. We're building relationships. People are getting used to us. They're getting to know us. They know what drinks we want. They know what we're wanting to order before we even order it. We're developing relationships with people we'd like to know. So think about being a regular customer somewhere, frequenting the same establishment over and over and over so you can get to know the people who work there, and in some cases, even customers. But a word of warning, you need to be a great tipper. make sure you tip well. All right, number 2. We must develop authentic friendships with missing persons. That is, these can't be friendships that are friendships in name only. They can't be tricks. We can't develop a relationship with strings attached that ends the moment we decide that person's not going to become a Christian. That is not what Jesus wants us to do. Genuine friendship means I let you into my life as long as you're open to my ideas in my life. I'm open to you and to your ideas in your life. We're going to be friends. There's going to be give and take on both sides. That's friendship. If I pretend to be your friend in order to trick you into becoming a Christian and drop you if that doesn't seem to be working, that's not friendship. That is making a person a project, and that is not what we're about. People can sniff this kind of inauthenticity from a mile away, and it should not characterize people who love Jesus. So we need to love people enough to share our lives with them regardless of what happens later. I mentioned Ben and Christina earlier. We developed a friendship with them early on after Ben sold us our house. And after we'd been friends for a while, we went out to eat, and Ben and Christina told us before they took us out to eat to one of our favorite restaurants, hey, we have something really important to talk to you about tonight. So we went out to eat, and we're eating, and all of a sudden it got real quiet, and Ben said, we have something really important we'd like to talk to you about, if that's okay. Instantly, I thought we were in trouble. I thought that maybe we had been too off-putting about sharing our faith. I thought maybe we'd used too much pressure. And yet in the back of my mind, I knew if anything, we hadn't really been bold enough about our faith. So I was really worried. And then Ben and Christina looked at us in the eye, and they said, guys, we love you, and we enjoy this friendship, and we really want to go to your church. So first of all, we'd like to ask you a question. Is it okay if we go to your church? You've never invited us. I felt really bad. And I said, absolutely. It's for people just like you. And then they said, okay, well, here's the real thing we wanted to talk about. We really want to go and investigate the Christian faith. But we're not sure if we do that we'll become followers of Jesus like you. There's a risk. And we're worried that if we start attending your church and nothing happens and we don't become followers of Jesus, we're afraid that our friendship, which we really enjoy, will end. I suddenly realized that they were asking us, does our friendship have strings attached? To which I quickly replied, you know what? We're your friends now. And you're not even attending our church, and you don't even pretend to know Jesus. So regardless of what happens in the future, we want you to know we will still love you and still be your friends. That is really, really important. Friendship needs to be authentic. One thing I would say to new Christians, especially young Christians, is that when you spend time with non-believers, make sure you're going deep with believers as well. Make sure that you're always spending time with your home church and Christian friends. I've noticed that sometimes new converts, especially if they're young, often allow their non-believing friends to impact them more than they impact their friends. And that's a little bit dangerous. So be willing to say to your believing friends, hey, do you feel like I am strong enough to be a missionary to these friends? And listen carefully and allow people to give you some pushback about that. Number 3, we must recognize that becoming a follower of Jesus is a process. In other words, we rarely ever see someone come to know Jesus after one conversation. And though that does sometimes happen, I promise you there were hundreds of conversations before you ever met that person that they had with other people who love Jesus. It takes a long time for people in our culture to come to know Jesus. Think about this. I was raised in a Christian home, but I was 12 years old when I gave my life to Jesus. So in a sense, it took 12 years to get me there, and I grew up knowing about Jesus. In 1 Corinthians 3, verses 5 and 6, Paul says this, what after all is Apollos, and what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. There were at least 2 people involved, humanly speaking, in these people coming to faith, Paul and Apollos. And in reality, probably hundreds more. Cliff Knechtle is an American Christian apologist who loves to go to college campuses and have conversations with students about Jesus. And usually, one day at least, argues with some famous atheistic professor on campus. But one of the things that I really love that Cliff Connectley says is that evangelistic conversations are like links in a chain. And the last chain, if you want to imagine, is when a person actually becomes a follower of Jesus, and the first link is the first time they have some kind of conversation about spiritual matters. And he says, imagine there are 100 links in this chain. Only in the last link does the person actually become a follower of Jesus. But there are, in that case, 98 conversations about spiritual matters somewhere in the middle. And some of us are very early on in having a conversation with someone about spiritual matters. Sometimes it's a little bit later. Sometimes it's right in the middle of their experience of becoming a Christian. Sometimes it's very late in the process and very close to the time they actually become a Christian. What Cliff Connectley says is, in this case, 98% of the conversations, really more like 99% of the conversations, don't lead to conversion, but they're all part of what leads to conversion. Only one conversation at the very end could be called the conversation where someone becomes a Christian. Most of us are going to be a middle link. We're going to be somewhere in the middle. That's okay. These conversations right here are just as important as this conversation because this one doesn't happen without this one. So we need to look at evangelism differently. Every single spiritual conversation matters, not just the one at the end. If Cliff Connectley is correct, and each conversation's like a link in a chain, then you and I are going to have to become comfortable sharing the gospel in small doses. It's not important that we share everything we know about Jesus today. Just share what that person needs to hear right now, and other conversations in the future will take care of the rest. I mentioned Benjamin earlier. While Ben was still trying to sell me a house with U.S. Home, it took a while because Hope and I were looking at least one other builder. We finally decided on U.S. Home. We decided on a particular model, and they proceeded. At some point in that process, Ben needed me to come down to his office and sign some documents. So I went down, and I signed the documents. I initialed the documents, and as I'm doing that, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? Ben's about to make a little bit of money off us buying this house from him. I bet he will be a captive audience if I talk about spiritual things. So he walks me out to my car, and I remember there was a gravel parking lot. So we're standing next to my car. I'm getting ready to say goodbye, and I just became bold. And I said, so Ben, your name, Benjamin, that sounds Jewish. Are you Jewish? And he goes, as a matter of fact, I am Jewish. And I said, how about that? Did you grow up practicing Judaism in any form? And he goes, I did. I said, well, was it Orthodox or conservative or was it Reformed Judaism? And he said, wow, you know a lot about Judaism. And I said, that's pretty much all I know about Judaism. And he goes, well, it was actually Reformed Judaism. And I said, well, how about that? I said, well, that's really cool. I said, so do you practice Judaism now or did you walk away after you turned 18? He said, well, when I grew up and left the house, I pretty much stopped practicing the Jewish faith. And I married a woman, Christina, who's actually from a Roman Catholic background, but neither one of us are religious. In fact, we just believe that all that really matters is that you're a good person and good people go to heaven. And I said, well, Ben, that's interesting. I have a lot of conversations about spiritual matters with a lot of people, and that is probably what I hear the most, is that most people think good people go to heaven. You know what's interesting is Jesus of Nazareth said something really different. He said, really, what did he say? I said, he said only perfect people get into the kingdom of heaven. So Ben looked at me and he said, well, nobody's perfect. I said, exactly. And for a moment there was just silence. And I said, well, you know what? We should definitely talk more about this sometime, but I need to go. I'll catch you later. And Ben just stood there and said, okay. And I got in my car and I drove away and I just left Ben hanging. I felt the need to do that day because I felt like instead of answering all of his questions, I should leave him hanging like Jesus did. And Jesus often did that. Because if Ben had ears to hear and eyes to see, that conversation would be picked up later. But if Ben didn't care about spiritual matters, there's no sense wasting his time. But I drove off in that parking lot, and I was proud of myself because I didn't share everything I knew. I simply stated one hard reality about the Christian faith and let Ben think about it until our next conversation. So, share the gospel in doses and leave people hanging. Number 4, we should invite missing persons to belong to our community before they believe. In the old days, we would go outside of the church, share the gospel. When people became Christians, we would say, welcome to the family. What we're learning now, church planners and pastors in a postmodern culture, is that in order for the average non-believer today to come to faith, they have to be around people of faith. They have to actually understand why people of faith think like they think and live the way they live. And it takes time. So what we're discovering more and more is that before a person comes to faith in Jesus, they actually become part of a faith community. They actually walk among us for a while. They spend time getting to know us. They want to understand, is this authentic? Do you really believe this stuff? Does this really impact the way you live Monday through Friday? How does this affect your parenting? How does this affect your marriage? They want to understand everything they can about Christians and not just Christianity. So it's important for us to develop friendships and bring people into the faith community. That's why our home churches have covenants that are written in such a way that a non-believer can actually join a home church. We don't ask that they be committed to Jesus yet. Just be committed to the other people in the home church. We feel like if that happens, that either they're going to walk away at some point or they're actually going to become people of faith at some point. This was what St. Patrick did. I love the books that I've read and that I have on my shelf about St. Patrick and the way he shared the gospel with the Irish. One of the things that Patrick did is he would bring a group of Christians with him on his missionary team. He would go to a small town, a small village. He would camp right next to them, and he would set up his own community. And then he would invite the Irish people to come and participate in his community. And some of those people eventually became Jesus followers. When they did, he would take some with him to be part of his missionary team so he could better reach the Irish. And he would leave some others of his team behind so they could mentor and help the Irish who were Christians to grow. He would bring people into the community. And we've done that over and over and over again. One young couple that used to attend our church is Steve and Brittany Allclair. Steve and Brittany actually became part of one of our home churches before they ever came to faith. They became followers of Jesus after months of participation in a home church because they grew to become believers after spending time with believers. So it's critical that we invite people to actually be part of our home church before they believe. Number 5, we must give God permission to interrupt us with missing persons. If you think about it, Jesus actually healed people that he knew would never come to faith. Think about the hundreds of people that must have been in lines sometimes, waiting to be healed. And Jesus knew that most of the people in that line would never become followers of him. But he took the time to heal them anyway. We also have to be willing to be interrupted by missing persons. Years ago when I was still teaching at Pima, I remember going across town. I must have driven 45 minutes to an hour to go to an art show for one of my students. He was an artist. He loved art. That was his thing. He was taking one of my classes at Pima. He mentioned that he was having an art show. Somebody told me years ago that artists love for people to go to their art shows. They love for people to care about their art, to go to their concerts. And I've done that with students who are actually in bands as well. So I went to his art show, and I walked around, and I actually thought he was going to be at the art show and that I could actually see him. But he wasn't there, just his work was on display. So I didn't go with anyone else. I drove across town, I looked at his art, I got in my car, came back, and just shot him an email and said, hey, I checked out the art show, loved your art. I was hoping to meet you. I guess this wasn't one of those meet and greet things, but I enjoyed looking at your art. I never saw that guy again after my class was over. I've never had a spiritual conversation with him. I don't know if that young man will ever become a Christian. But I took the time to care about his art because he cares about his art. And it may never result in a conversion, but that's okay. We have to be willing to let God interrupt our schedules to love non-believers where they are. Number 6, we must invest more time with those who show interest in spiritual matters. Now, this sounds contradictory to what I just said. On the one hand, I have to let God interrupt me with people when it's not on my schedule. On the other hand, I also have to be strategic enough to only invest in people who are open. So anybody has the right at any time to interrupt me if God says, be interrupted today. But I will not go out of my way to make appointments with just anyone. I am very strategic about how I spend my time. I have to be. So I don't just go to breakfast or lunch or coffee with just anyone. I think very carefully about that, and I plan that around people, both believers and non-believers, who are open to spiritual things. So when I invest a lot of time in a non-believer, it's someone who's open. It's someone who's willing to talk about spiritual matters. It's someone who's more open than someone else. There are plenty of people in my life that are hostile to the Christian faith. I'll let them interrupt me, but I won't give them loads and loads of my time, if that makes sense. Let me show you a video here that was actually shot by Willow Creek Community Church. And as you watch this video, I want you to think about this question. Of all the people being interviewed, which of these people would you actually drop everything and spend the next half hour to 2 hours talking about spiritual matters?
I was wondering if you could tell me, who is Jesus?
Jesus is God.
Savior of the Christian faith.
He died in, Israel.
I think he's one of the gods.
Palestinian Jew living around the year 0 to 30.
Religious leader.
I think he was just a person that was really smart and wanted to make the world a better place or something.
He's a topic that I want to discuss.
Savior of the world.
The man who's going to lead us into the promised land in the next life.
A higher power above all things that no one can understand.
Jesus is a rabbi that was in the first century.
I believe Jesus was a prophet trying to create a new branch of Judaism. And I believe that they took his what his preachings were and then later on made it into something which I don't believe it was at all intended to be.
Probably he's a mythological figure that actually lived, and I think we've developed his persona over the years.
Possibly fictional, possibly real person.
My understanding is that he was a historical figure who played prominently in a whole lot of stuff.
Jesus is a historical character.
I'm sure he existed and was a great guy and stuff, but
he was a very enlightened and spiritual being, and I think he came to earth to teach us a few things.
I kind of believe in my heart that he was probably the world's greatest prophet we've ever had. Someone to learn from his lessons and kind of change the shape of mankind. There's no denying that. Big historical figure.
Very holy man who lived a long time ago.
Man walks around in a robe.
And sandals.
Yeah.
Long hair.
Yeah. He looks like my uncle, actually.
Can I say I'm not sure? I don't know. The guy in the Bible, I guess.
Is that a trick question?
Jesus is the Son of God.
I don't think Jesus ever called himself the Son of God.
Some people believe he's the Son of God. I don't.
That's a good question, and I don't think I have an answer who Jesus is.
When I watch that video every time, I almost weep when I see that last guy say, I don't know, I'm not sure who Jesus is. Something in me just hopes that that camera crew dropped everything and took some time to share the gospel with that guy. Not everybody in your life's going to be like that guy, but when you see him, you invest in him. And last but not least, number 7, we must recognize that simple acts of kindness count. If we're going to see Jesus at work in the lives of people around us, we have to be willing to serve them in very simple ways, in very small ways. And Jesus had a lot to say about this. In Matthew 10:42, Jesus said, "And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones because he is my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward." Wow! Simple acts of kindness count with Jesus. He gives even a prize to even one who gives a cup of cold water to someone. Look at this next verse. In Matthew 25:40, Jesus says, "The king will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." So it's little people and little acts. The simple things we do for simple people matter. Everything counts, even cups of cold water. Jesus is keeping a record. What does that mean for us? That means that we have to be willing to do what Steve Sjogren calls in his book, Conspiracies of Kindness. We have to actually go out of our way to intentionally show kindness to people in practical ways. Home churches do this in a form called ministry projects. We recommend that every home church do at least one ministry project a quarter. And here are the rules for a ministry project. Number one, it has to touch non-believers. Number two, it has to meet a practical need, something helpful, something useful for them, something that they recognize benefits them. And number three, it has to be done in a very limited time frame. Usually this is an event that takes about 2 hours at the most. One of the best ways we do this is with free water giveaways. I can't tell you how many times we've done this sort of thing. My favorite was the time I was in a home church at the Oasis, and we were actually at the intersection of Nexus and Valencia, and we were actually on Nexus waiting for people to come up to the stoplight to turn left. And we had a giant cooler. It was actually a horse trough. And it was filled with ice, and it was filled with soda, and it was filled with water. So for a while, we would hold up water and soda to people as they came to a stop and said, would you like a free soda or a free water? And we had these little cards that we gave out with each one that just said, this is a practical way to show you that God loves you. And it told a little bit about our church on the backside. Well, people would not even roll down their window. They wouldn't make eye contact because they felt like, hey, there's something going on here. There's something hinky here. So they wouldn't even make eye contact. They thought we were selling something. So eventually we had to have a poster. And someone stood further down before people turned left, and they held it up that said, free water and soda ahead. Absolutely free. No kidding. When we actually had that sign, people would roll down their windows and go, is this a scam? We would say, no, we're a church. We just want to give out free water and soda. Which one do you prefer? And then people would give us their orders, and there'd be several people in the car, and we just handed out free water and free soda and a small card with each one that told them we're expressing God's love in a tangible way. Home churches should be finding ways to team up and love people that way. It also means that we should pray for people behind their backs. In other words, when we pray for people and they don't know we're praying for them, that still counts. Pray for people behind their backs. In fact, home churches do this every week at the beginning of home church when they pray for the friendship list. Also, surprise people with random acts of kindness. One of my favorites that Rod Hugan told me about is reverse tipping. That is, you give a $20 tip on a $2 cup of coffee. This kind of reverse tipping blows people's minds. And if you give someone a $20 tip on a $2 meal, I promise you they will never forget you. And if you think about it, $20 is the cheapest way to become a hero that you could possibly imagine. For $20, that person will remember you every time you walk in. So practice random acts of kindness because Jesus says, I'm counting. All right, now for your homework assignment and your closing activity for this session. Your homework assignment is really big this week. Those 3 names that you came up with earlier, that you said, I want to invite these people, or I'm willing to invite these people to Easter Sunday, April the 12th, to join me at the Oasis. Those 3 names that you prayed for last week, your assignment this week is to ask each of your 3 people to please join you, to please come with you to Easter service, to just say, hey, would you be interested in being my personal guest at our church on Easter Sunday? I would love for you to come and sit next to me. That's the challenge, is to ask all 3. Now, you don't need to worry about whether they say yes or no, because that's not really your call or your responsibility. If you ask, then you've been obedient. Even if all of them say, no, I would never go to church on Sunday, I would never go on Easter, that's okay. That's fine. If you ask all three and you get 3 no's, you've succeeded. That's obedience. That's a victory, and I want you to rejoice. And home church leaders, you need to rejoice too. The whole home church needs to rejoice if people ask. That's all we want you to do is ask. And here's what you do. If you ask them and they say, you know what, I don't think so, that's not my gig, then just use the fact that you brought up Sunday service at Oasis. Use that as a segue to say, well, if you don't mind me asking, what is your spiritual life like? Would you consider yourself spiritual? And use that as a conversation starter. Use that as a bridge. We've talked about transitioning to spiritual things. By asking someone to join you on Easter, you've actually transitioned to a conversation about spiritual things. So even if they say no, use it as a transition. The second way they could respond is they could say, yeah, maybe, I don't know, perhaps, we'll see. If they give you that kind of answer, just say, that's okay, that's great. Can I follow up with you next week? And then next week, we're going to talk with you about following up with those who give you an ish kind of answer. And the third kind of answer is, yeah, I would like that very much. I would love to go with you. Then ask them if you could follow up next week to talk with them about the details about getting together. So that's what we want you to do. Ask all 3 this week for homework to join you on Easter Sunday, and then follow up appropriately depending on their answer. Now, the closing activity is simply what we did last week. We want you to join up in pairs, and we want you to pray for the friends on your impact list, including the people you plan to invite this week to join you on Easter Sunday. That's your assignment, and that's your activity. Now go do it.